I'm Grace Smith, a certified hypnotherapist and expert in rewiring the subconscious mind. Today I'm going to talk about a question that I've been asked a lot, which is, are past lives real? Out of the more than 10,000 sessions I've conducted with hypnotherapy clients, at least hundreds of them ended up being past life regressions, whether we set out with that intention or whether they happened spontaneously. So let me begin by sharing with you the process of a traditional past life regression session, because it sets the stage for understanding the rest of our discussion as to whether they're real or not. And I'm also going to share with you a few juicy stories of experiences I've had over the years that I know you'll be interested to hear. There are a number of different ways that you can conduct a past life regression hypnotherapy session. I'm going to talk about the Newtonian way, which is the first one that I learned, which is essentially you start with today, you go back and reminisce about two happy childhood moments. You go back into the womb when you yourself were in the womb, and that is fascinating, the amount of intel and information that clients get. And then you go back into your most recent past life, and from there, the subconscious might take you to a place called life between lives. It might go into future lives. It can kind of go all over the place from there. And this chronological order is supposed to help people get there easily and effortlessly. Now, some people are interested in past life regressions because they just want to see if they were Cleopatra, because they think that they were. And what my first teacher told us in class about this was, most people think they were Cleopatra, or they think they were some king. At the end of the day, though, percentage-wise, there were a lot more peasants than there were royalty. And so a lot of people can go into a past life thinking that they're going to see themselves as this famous whatever, and really they see themselves as a humble farmer. But what's so fascinating is that even as a humble farmer or a peasant, or, you know, even something that in today's eyes we would say, I would never, ever want to experience a past life as, for example, a slave. These experiences are so profound for the client. And here's what I want to get to. Before I share with you my take on whether they're real or not, let's look at it two ways. During a past life regression session, the client is 9 times out of 10 crying hysterically at a certain point because of what happened in that life. So this means they are either remembering something that actually happened, was actually traumatic, was actually sad, and they are remembering it now, and it's so heartbreaking that that's what's coming up. Or the power of their subconscious mind is so great that it created a story complete with a cast of characters, costumes, smells, sounds, and emotional embedded heartbreak. And we're crying over something that is so powerful, and yet it's completely made up. But the most important part, because I don't do these things just for the novelty of them. I do them because people heal. They transform. Their lives are completely different after this experience. So your subconscious makes this whole thing up where you've got a different skin color. You're a different gender. It is 700 years ago, and you're bawling your eyes out because your son just went off to war and isn't going to return, or whatever it is. And then afterwards, you stop biting your nails, or you're not afraid of flying anymore, or you heal your relationship. It is so profoundly healing, and that's why we do them. So when people are interested in doing past lives just for fact finding, you know, that's not what I do. I don't provide that. But when people want to heal something that is not explained in this life, it's always, always fascinating to test out a PLR, or it's even more fascinating when they happen spontaneously. So I'm going to share 2 examples because they're just so fascinating and great. I talk about them in, I believe I talk about one of them in my first book. I'm not sure if I've written the second one down anywhere. But the first example was, I was early on in my hypnotherapy career. I had not studied past life regression yet. I had only studied regular traditional clinical hypnotherapy at this point. And a woman came to me who was morbidly obese, and she needed to have double knee replacement surgery, and her insurance would not cover it because of her weight. She was a nurse. She'd been a nurse for decades. She had a very, very rational, medicine-based outlook of the world. And so it was already so much for her to come to a hypnotherapist. And she was just coming to me for traditional hypnotherapy weight loss. So we begin the session and I say, let's go back to the source of the issue. And all of a sudden, she's explaining to me that she is a teenage boy and she starts crying hysterically. And she's telling me that she's holding her little brother who just died in her arms, but she's a boy in this life. I don't even really know that it's a past life yet. To be perfectly honest, I mean, I've been a hypnotherapist 11 years. This was probably like 3 months in. So this was 10 years and however many months ago. I'm just completely bewildered. Like, what is happening here? And she's describing to me that her skin is very, very dark. Her little brother's bones are protruding because he's so thin. Starts telling me how their parents had just died from a famine. And then we progress. I just basically just keep asking what happens next. I don't have any training for this. And I just start assuming that this little boy, this teenage boy whose little brother just died in his arms, is the client. So that's who I'm having the session with now. And it progresses a little bit more, goes a little bit further in time, and then the little boy himself, the teenager rather, dies. The client dies. And then all of a sudden, she is describing how he's floating above his body and going towards a light, and then ends up in a room surrounded by these like benevolent light beings, and they're basically debriefing this life with a soul who is somehow both my client who's sitting in front of me, who is a woman in her 50s who's Caucasian with blonde hair and is morbidly obese, and the soul who's also a teenage boy with dark skin and protruding bones from being so emaciated who just died of starvation. What just happened? So eventually the session has to end. I have another client coming, and we, bring the client up from the theta brainwave state. And I think she's going to be very upset with me because this is not at all what this nurse intended to do today. But she was very polite and she left. And ultimately she ended up losing 75 pounds, had the double knee replacement surgery. And prior to that session, she had been obsessed with keeping the cupboards full. It had been an OCD tick in her life, was that the cupboards had to be full. If a soup can came out, a soup can had to go back. And she had also eaten every single meal in her life as if it was her last meal. And from that session on, she never did that again. The compulsion to have the cupboards completely full went away, and the compulsion to eat every single meal as if it was her last completely went away. So was it that she actually had a past life where she died of starvation and brought that neuroses, that fear and that trauma into this life where the pendulum swung so far to the other side that now she has these compulsions around eating? Is that what actually happened? Or is it that the wisdom of her brain constructed this unbelievably in-depth story where this woman is sobbing hysterically over the loss of her little brother in her arms? I mean, sobbing, but it's all made up. And then she heals anyway. I mean, the latter one's actually a little bit more cool. Like, rather than just remembering something that happened, like our brain made this thing up. So I haven't told you yet what my take is, but let's go into the second example. Also, before we get into the second example, let's just keep in mind that there are places all over the world where the religious belief, the cultural belief, the societal belief is that there are past lives, there are reincarnations, we are living our karma from previous lives. There are quite literally billions of people in the world who believe in past lives. So I'm speaking to you as if this is primarily a Western-based audience and past lives seem like a bizarre, strange woo thing. But I want to be very clear that that's not actually overwhelmingly the case globally. In many parts of the world, this is a completely normal and natural belief system to have. And it's one that I deeply respect. So even when I say it's almost more interesting to have the mind make it up, I do think that's very fascinating that the mind might have the capability of doing that. But even if you're watching this and you don't believe in past lives, I think it's important for us all to have a tremendous amount of respect for the fact that this is just the way it is for billions of people all over the world. And these are ancient beliefs going back, religions that are thousands of years old. Even though I haven't shared with you my take yet, I do have a lot of respect for these parts of the world and the religions and the faith and the people who believe that this is just the way that it is. So this next example is really interesting. Similarly, it happened early on in my career. This was an attorney who came in with inexplicable body pain. It wasn't fibromyalgia. They tested for everything and they had no idea why this person was in so much excruciating amounts of pain. Once again, very analytical, someone who really is extremely rational. It was very difficult for them to come in for just normal hypnotherapy. And again, remember, this is over 10 years ago. So it's easier for people to go to a hypnotherapist now. Even just a decade ago, it took a lot of courage to go see a hypnotherapist. And they really came as a last resort. They had tried everything else before they came. So this attorney sits down, we start the session. I say, let's go to the source of the pain. And we find ourselves on another planet with alien type beings that look like humans except for with bobble heads, these huge big heads, and they would run everywhere like at warp speed, like just so fast. But when they wanted to communicate with you, they would come right in front of your face and then they would come into view. This is what the client is explaining to me. I'm not saying anything. I just said go to the source, and now this person is explaining this planet with these beings and what they're like. And one of them comes up and says, I knew you couldn't hack it on Earth. I knew you'd be back, kind of taunting her. She's telling me about this. So we have no idea what the heck that is about. And we just keep progressing forward. Again, I had not yet had any training in PLR yet. And we get to a kind of cottage, and the client enters into the cottage, and there's an older bobblehead woman there who says, nope, you told me if you came back that I was not supposed to give it to you. And after a lot of back and forth, we finally figure out, what are you talking about? And the client is telling me that the old woman is telling her that she had never incarnated on Earth before and was afraid she wouldn't like it. So she left 80% of her soul back on this other planet, and the old woman was guarding it and had been told by her to not give her any more of it, even if she came back asking for it. Can you imagine? I was just like this in this session. So interested, fascinating. I'm like, what the heck do we do here? So we had to explain to the grandma bobblehead alien lady that this client was essentially dying on Earth. I mean, she was in excruciating pain, 10 being such blinding, excruciating pain that you can't move, you can't function, you can't live a life. Her average was an 8 every single day. That is extremely high amounts of pain for a woman in the prime of her life. I don't remember now, it was so long ago, but I believe she was in her late 30s at the time. So we had to explain to this grandma bobblehead alien lady that her body was failing on Earth and she needed to get her soul back. And we don't even know that this is actually going to solve the problem, but the breadcrumbs are what led us here and led us to believe that that would be the case. So finally, obviously, this woman's an attorney in this lifetime. There was a lot of great negotiating happening, and I'm just facilitating, and she's able to get a good piece of her soul back. I think maybe it was like 60% of the 80% that was there, and we had this whole like integrated into her body thing. And then come back from the session again, I'm afraid that the attorney is going to be really upset or like freaked out, and she leaves. And I hear from her now I would never offer a single hypnotherapy session because it's not magic. It's not one and done. There was so much that was revealed there that it's a process of conditioning. You got to come back and do at least 3 to 6 sessions at a bare minimum. But at the time I was brand new. I had launched my business with a living social. She had gotten one of the sessions, and many months later, I get an email from her saying, after that session, my average pain went from an 8 to a 2. So while there was still a lot more work that could have been done, and I do believe if we had kept going, we would have gotten it down to likely a 0, but we also would have cleaned up a lot of the trauma that happened from the years of having had chronic inexplicable pain, not to mention checking out that alien world a little bit more and figuring that out. It was still incredibly impactful with just the one session. So do I think that they're real? Again, I am not the expert. None of us will be the expert while we're here living on Earth. We will only know for sure once we are gone. But having conducted so many of these and now having received trainings from multiple teachers at the best institutes and having trained my own students and creating our own certification in this, I tend to lean towards the camp of it's real, simply because of how emotional they are and because of how powerful just the one session can be. I highly recommend doing more. And also, part of why I tend to lean toward it being real is because they happen spontaneously. Once you've been trained in this, people will come to you because they want to experience this. They want to do it on purpose. And so you start with that process I shared with you in the beginning, and you just go backwards in time. Or you can do a soul key type therapy, which is another one I'm certified in, where you go to this like magical library room and you can go to future, past, talk to this amazing council that helps you debrief all at once. The Newtonian backwards tends to be a really good one where you just, chronologically going back in time for first timers. But after that, I think a soul key is more of a fun thing. Anyway, before you have all that training, these things just happen spontaneously. And I find that very interesting that we're setting out to do a session for weight loss. We're setting out to do a session for decreasing pain. And we end up in a whole different part of the country, a whole different year, a whole different body, a whole different gender, or a whole different planet. I tend to lean towards this is real and we're tapping into something. And, if you think of it in terms of string theory, it's not necessarily that this is actually happening in the past. It might be more that this is happening right now in a different dimension. But again, we don't know, and we won't know until we're no longer living. That's my best guess. And what I find very cool too is that if someone comes to me, because if you're watching this and let's say you're a devout Catholic and you don't like the idea of intentionally doing a past life regression and you're afraid of one maybe happening spontaneously, you can just as easily say, this is a story being made up by my subconscious. It's really powerful and it's going to help me heal really, really fast. Not to mention, it's just going to be a fun session because it's going to be they're all fun, but extra special, interesting, and nuanced. But I have found that people who are devoutly religious in this life, if this does happen spontaneously, what's very cool is when they get to the debrief part, it's like Jesus will be there, or Mary Magdalene will be there, or an incredible saint, or a Buddhist bodhisattva, or a rabbi that was their rabbi when they were a child. And so I just want you to know that whatever your current faiths, I have never had someone have a spontaneous past life regression and go into a crisis of faith. That is something that I think is important for you to know, that if anything, they'll have a spontaneous experience and the spiritual part of it will bring them such deep peace. And my guess is that whatever energies are helping us to do this profound healing clearly know us really well and are going to show up in the format that is going to be the most healing, the most cathartic, the most peaceful, and the most joyful. And the reason I say that is because I never had an atheist see Jesus, and I never had a Christian see, I don't know, Buddha. But they will see the things that they care about and that bring them peace and that bring them comfort. I believe that's the case almost across the board. I have had a few agnostic people see religious figures, which is very interesting and cool. But anyway, I've never had anyone had a crisis of faith. They always feel better. They always get better. They always enjoyed the session. I've never had anyone get mad. And I love them. They're my favorite. I spend so much time making hypnosis mainstream and helping people who are more logical, who are more rational, who enjoy scientific based information and things that have, triple blind studies and whatever else. wrap their head around the fact that hypnosis is not magic, and there is so much data that proves that it is effective, that I almost never talk about the spiritual side of hypnotherapy. And it's my absolute favorite. I just don't want to turn away or turn off people who like just need to overcome their fear of flying, and this can help them, and it can help them so fast that I just don't want them to have to buy into this concept as well. It's just like, close your eyes, relax. If you feel safe, you make new connections in the brain that much faster. That's what it is. That's what it is. And these incredibly profound things can happen, and I feel like they only happen for people when that's what they need and they're ready for it, whether their conscious mind knows it or not. So that's my take. Please let me know in the comments below what was most interesting for you in this conversation. What was your biggest aha moment? Are you interested in having a past life regression? Have you had one before? What was it like? Oh, I probably should have told you about mine. If you want to hear about some of mine, because I've had a lot, I'd be happy to share in another video. Let me know in the comments below. I'll only make one if people are actually interested. I don't want to talk about myself too much if it's not of interest. But I hope you liked this, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about something that I love and that I very rarely actually talk about. So I'm Grace Smith. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.